Cafe CLIL 11, The Language of Chemistry, recorded on Tuesday, May the 18th from 5 to 6 p.m. Central European Time.
Can I ask Andreas, would you say just a couple of words about yourself? I know we've got your profile on the website, but it's been there for quite a while now because of my PC problems. And then perhaps Stephen, if you could say a couple of words about yourself as well, and then I'll set the agenda, okay?
Yeah, okay. So hello everybody, my name is Andreas, I'm from Austria. I work as a teacher of English and a couple of other subjects for a technical college here in Austria, and I work for CEPS, which stands for Center für berufsbezogene Sprachen. We are the language competence center for vocational schools and colleges here in Austria, and my specialty, which I'm in charge of here with CEPS, is CLIL.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And
may I ask a question?
Oh, just a second. Louis,
okay.
We'll come back to Andreas in a moment, and then because I always feel it's just quite nice to hear a newcomer's voice, you know, before we get started. And I'll come back to you in a minute, Louis. Okay, Stephen.
Well, thank you kindly. Yes, my name's Steve Watts. I live and work in the Czech Republic. We work as a private language school specializing in teaching English to very young learners. Traditionally, I'm more centered to kindergarten and early primary schools. But as things continue to grow and the topic of CLIL becomes increasingly interesting and important for teachers, I'm here to sort of get a few ideas and to listen in and to eavesdrop really this time round. So
okay.
I'll try and contribute if I can, but
that sounds great, Stephen. Can I ask you a favour? Could you try and bring your mic a little bit closer to your mouth? I don't know if it's faint for others.
Is that a little better?
It is a bit better, yeah.
Okay.
And Louis, you wanted to ask a question to Andreas.
Yeah, I'm from Austria as well, Andreas. I'm from Innsbruck.
Yep.
I would like to ask you, where's your school?
My school is HT Leonding, which is near Linz. A technical college for informatics and electronics.
Okay. And you are focusing on CLIL as well?
Yep.
Okay. And how much is done at this type of school? What would you say in Austria?
Well, we actually do quite a lot, not in a very structured way, not a very organized way, but lots of trial and error going on. But within the hotels or technical colleges sector, we are doing quite a lot, and we are running education and training for that, supporting our colleagues quite a lot, offering seminars and so on.
Okay, thank you, Andreas.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Well, we have a theme this time for number 11. It's amazing that we've had it. This is our 11th discussion, and the theme I advertised feels like ages ago is the language of chemistry, with some specific materials on the website, just as a prompt really for us to talk about this theme. And if you had the chance to look back there, I suggested 3 pointers for us to revolve our discussion around, and they were describing the language that the sample materials suggest and analysing that language, and the second thing was talk about what the demands of that language of the chemistry, bearing in mind that we are obviously talking about learners of English as a second language, and then the third thing, make some suggestions. So what I'd like to do, if we can, is take those sample materials as our springboard, but by all means go off in other directions, because I know obviously Egbert and Lida have a chemistry background, so they'll offer us some expert knowledge of the subject and language of the subject. But I think also it's interesting having Steve here because of his very early learners' perspective on perhaps science for kindergarten and primary, and the language demands outside the sample materials. I think that's what I'm saying. Does anybody want to make a start?
I would like to put a question again.
Go ahead.
Where did you get this text from? In other words, is that an original English text?
Well, it actually comes from the Science Across the World programme, which is, I mean, it's a British non-government organisation that created the programme, but the team of writers, of which Egbert and Lida are both members, so we've got a German and a Dutch writers from that writing team, and these resources are written in many, many languages, Louis, not just English.
Yeah.
Please, may I make a comment here?
Go ahead, Lida.
Yeah, as a team, we design the topic, but then later it is written by a native speaker. So the English is the basis. So what you see here is originally written in English, and then later it is translated to German, to Dutch, to, well, whatever language we have for this topic.
What was the basis for your question, Louis? Tell us what you were thinking about.
Yeah, that was the reason why I put this question. So it makes a difference where the text comes from. Is it original English or not, and translated into the other languages? That makes a difference, of course. And I thought, looking through the materials, it is well done, well structured, everything okay. I mean, the date is a bit...
it's 10 years old, isn't it?
10 years ago, that is another problem. But what I can't find in this text is working on the language. As is that, it is addressed to students whose English is a second language. Is their second language, of course. And therefore, I was actually missing the part how to work out all these things based on the language part.
Yeah, it's actually the materials are written, as Lida said, by native speakers. They, by and large...
Sorry, the English one.
Yeah, the English one's written by native speakers.
Yeah.
And then they're adapted for the other languages. And I think largely they're Italian, German, French, Portuguese and Spanish are the other main languages that the material is written in. And pretty much all the materials are written in Dutch as well, I think, Lida, if I'm right. And we've got this one in Bulgarian. But I think your point, Louis, is about the thought that's given to the learners who will come to this learning English as a second or a foreign language. And I don't think they do pay a lot of attention to the language demands of the materials. That's not a criticism, because the idea of Science Across the World is working in your mother tongue and finding a common language for exchange with partner classes in other countries. And that may be English, but it may be another language as well. Later materials have had more thought put to the language, and if you visit the website, you'll see that some of the later resources, like talking about genetics and biodiversity and what did you eat, they actually have language teacher notes in them. That's not the case for Acid Rain over Europe. But my point was, it's actually quite representative of the kind of materials a lot of CLIL teachers download from the internet or scan from textbook pages, and then they have to do some adaptation to meet the needs of their learners in their classrooms. And I suppose we could have taken any science material or other subject material, and I hope we will, for future discussions, take other content material and talk about the demands they place on the learners.
And maybe next time we can have a look at one of the other topics that do have materials for language teachers, like chemistry in our lives, for instance, and so that we can comment on, or that the language teachers can comment on if this is any good and for what age groups. Is the age group okay? For learners whose English is a second language.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. And actually, when I was preparing this discussion, it did seem to me very, very useful, potentially, for us to take a wide variety of topic material from different subjects and different ages as well, Stephen, thinking about you specifically. And then we actually pile together our our collective expertise, if you like, and we analyse, we make suggestions about potential demands, and then we make suggestions about ways for dealing with. Because I think as a resource, there's a lot we can offer people who are quite isolated within their own teaching and learning environment, and they need a lot of ideas. That was the idea I had when I put this discussion together.
I'd say from my experience of going into classrooms for the sort of early to mid-teens, is that there is a lot of information, like you say, that the teachers, they download from the internet. They have some great resources, but it tends to be that the English teachers are frightened of the content, and the content teachers are frightened of the English. So it's sort of helping to bridge that gap there.
Yeah, but I have to say to the whole group, because Lida did say to me, Louis, to pick up your point, that these materials are a little bit out of date in 1999. By all means, do send me topic suggestions, even pages or resources of materials that you would like us to focus a discussion on. And I think that's a very productive, very fruitful way for us to use our time. It also potentially makes it easier for us to to structure a discussion if we've got such a focus.
Well, let me just try to take Louis' question. This type of language as picture language is really attractive for me as a teacher of biology and chemistry, not an English language teacher, because I can present the content and then can work with the different abilities of students in their second language. So some of the better English learners will have a very refined text to talk, to write about such a picture, and kids with low ability in English will only draw probably a concept map with some words, and because they can't use connectors to present a real sentence. So it's a starter, and it gives opportunities to students of different abilities.
I'd like to pick up on Egbert very, very quickly. In previous discussions, we've tried to produce in our minutes of the discussion principles, and Egbert's come out with a principle I'd like to highlight straight away, and that is we might all agree, or we might debate this suggestion that representing content for CLIL learners through diagrams is a very good principle. Personally, I agree with Egbert's comments on that, and I think if we can draw out similar principles, that would be part of this very useful resource for teachers, I think.
May I come in here?
Please do, Andreas.
So I've had a look at all those materials, and it's definitely something that many teachers would use in their classroom. So I'm thinking of science teachers now, and what Egbert mentioned before, for example, connectors or linkers, that could make up a wonderful CLIL task, for example, to take some of the examples here, tables, diagrams, illustrations, whatever, and produce a task that asks students to use those linkers they probably do not have at hand right away. There's lots of graphs and diagrams included here. It's about reading out formula. It's about signs and symbols. It's lots of technical terms. So if you take a text or material like that, I think you could sort of produce 5, 10, or even more real CLIL tasks if you wanted.
And when you highlight linking phrases, Andreas, do you have a suggestion for a technique for presenting them in some way? Because that's one of the main challenges as well, I think, of a CLIL approach is to identify some language. What's the best way of dealing with it during the lesson? Did you think of that as well?
Well, so I can think of one of the examples that colleagues of mine produced in one of our CLIL booster courses. They split up sentences into their different parts, and let students put these sentences together again. So that means, for example, one column with all the subjects, one column with all the verbs that you use, one column with all the linkers that could be used. And then students started talking about, for example, illustrations or tables and diagrams, and taking all these bits and pieces of sentences and putting them together newly.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I mean, that might lend itself quite effectively to expressing in full chemical formulae.
Yeah.
I haven't actually sat down to do that, Andreas, but it might be something that's a suggestion for examining the language of of chemical formulae and see if they can be prepared in that way, so that learners have to work together in pairs or small groups to link them all up into accurate sentences.
Yeah.
I've got...
Louis?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Can I give you another suggestion in terms of, say, an activity at the end of this chapter?
Go ahead, Louis.
Yeah, it's learning about scientific terms, of course. Quite a lot of terms are in here. And I've just tried out this odd one out technique. At the end of this chapter, you could tell the students that they should compile sets of terms, the three combined together, and the other students, the partner student, could odd one out. You know this technique, of course. And that would be a nice activity at the end of this chapter, in order to make sure that the students understand all the terms, the specific terms used in this text. What would you say about that? Yeah.
So you might use that as a form, an instrument for a bit of assessment as well. Is that your suggestion?
Not actually an assessment, but in order to consolidate the knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, focusing on vocabulary, I suppose, the concept.
Yeah. That would be working on one suggestion regarding working on the language, as I said before.
Can I bring us kind of about turn just a little bit, because in a way what we're doing, because you're all very, very experienced, it's quite natural that you would want to start to do that straight away, is to make suggestions about activities. But I think just because of the kind of listeners we get, and I got a very nice email from a colleague in Spain telling me that she was using the recordings during her teacher training workshops. I think I sent it out actually to you all, and for that reason I'd like to go through the material and suggest the language areas, you know, that will lead up to these potential activities. I think that's what I'd like to try and slow down a little bit and do a bit of identification before we get to the suggestions for tasks, if that's okay.
Sure.
I mean, if you look at the first page, which sets out background knowledge for acid rain over Europe, it already looks at effects, and effects on living things and non-living things. So the area of the text, the reading text, in terms of language, is going to be the language of cause and effect. Effects on living things and effects on non-living things. And that's also the case for the pH table on the right, which, although it doesn't have any verbs there, apart from die, there's a lot of verb language necessary to express all of that table in full sentences. And that full sentence language is going to be cause and effect according to rising pH level. Go on, Lida.
Which version or which do you use of acid rain? Because I have in front of me the downloadable version from the internet, and I can't find, what we're talking about.
Well, I think we'll have to stick with the one that's on the website, Lida, because it may be that I'm pretty certain that this is the one I got from the Science Across website.
Okay.
But if you go to the Cafe CLIL page, Lida, if you've got your internet in front of you, the first page has a general briefing and possible effects of acid rain, with the table with an eel and fish and certain water life, and when it dies at a certain pH level in the water.
It's student page 1, leader.
Yes, but sure, I have another version, but I'll go to the website and have a look.
But in a way, we all need to talk about this version that's public, don't we? Because we'll all be talking about the same content and the same language then. Let me carry on, because there we've got cause and effect. The other aspect is language talking about stages, different stages of acidification of water. And that language, I was going to say, is visible within the table as well, isn't it, at different pH levels?
Yeah.
On the next page, student page 2, the first thing that caught my eye is the diagram which represents the whole process of how acid rain is formed. And so there we've got the sequences of that process. And so the language that we are assuming the students will have for describing this diagram of this process of how acid rain is formed is the language of sequences. First of all, after that, next, at this stage, at this point, following that, the next thing that happens is, and all of this language, we're assuming the students have it to be able to express this diagram. So sequencing. And Andreas mentioned the language of chemical formulae, which is part and parcel of the whole text down the left-hand side of that same page, isn't it? Being able to express those formulae in full phrases. As a native speaker, I'm not sure I could myself. But I could have a go. But we know it's there, the language of chemical formulae in full. And chemistry teachers, and Egbert and Lida will tell me if I'm wrong, would expect their students to be able to read aloud these chemical formulae.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's all input information. And already we've got 4 clear areas: cause and effect, stages, sequences in a process, and expressing in full chemical formulae. We haven't even started to look at the questions, which have a complete area of language demand of their own, each and every one of them, on the next page, students page 3. Would anybody like to comment about that very quick examination of the language I've just made of the first 2 pages? Add anything or alter anything I've said?
Okay, as a chemist teacher,
yeah.
I'd like to say, as chemists, we like it in Germany in chemistry lessons that students just write the formulas, and we do not really stress on the text that you can read from the formula. And we think it's a high academic level if a student is able just to write it in chemical abbreviations and in reaction lines. And on the other hand, we are not really we do not like them to write the text. It's a lower ability to talk in sentences, and it's a higher academic ability to read it and write it in such formulas. So there is a problem if a science teacher in Germany talks about scientific text,
yeah,
and a language teacher talks about scientific text. And as we have normally a rather small amount of teachers with both teaching language and science, there is a very broad gap between these people working on a CLIL aspect.
Yeah, I think if I can paraphrase part of what you said, Egbert is disagreeing with me. Egbert's saying that for a chemistry lesson, it's more important to be able to write the formulae than say them. Is that right, Egbert?
Yeah.
What do the rest of you feel about that?
I don't agree.
Wonderful.
I think that when you start, using formulas, you always have to relate it to text and to, for instance, what I always do is in a formula, they always have to tell me what the state is. So whether it is a liquid or a gas or a solid state, that helps students a lot, to make the link between formulas and the text, and it helps weak students a lot because the bright ones, but they're never a problem. So.
Yeah. I mean, I asked that question there, Lida, as a language teacher because it just seems to make sense to me as a language teacher to request of students to say the formulae aloud, and frequently, chemistry teachers, CLIL chemistry teachers, do ask me how to express formulae. Like H2SO4, for example. If that's not the right example, it's a good example to contextualize my point. So as a language teacher, I would say it's probably a good thing. Louis, you were going to jump in.
Yeah.
Please do.
I've got a question regarding the whole topic now. I'm a geography teacher, and acid rain plays an important role in our subject as well. But I'm not very familiar with all the chemistry stuff. Could you give me an example? One of the two experts, it's Lida, and who is the other one expert? You are a chemistry teacher,
Yep.
Is that true? So I'm taking just this one, N2, so there's a capital N2, then in brackets a small g, plus I would read it that way. So expressing that and using words, how would you do that? What would you think is necessary to demand from the student side to be able to express that in words?
And Louis, what page was that?
That is page 2.
Let me try it, Louis.
Yeah.
Nitrogen molecules as a gas react with oxygen molecules as a gas.
Okay.
React to two nitrogen oxide molecules
As a gas.
as a gas.
Okay. I've understood. So that would be expressing that in words, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think you make that point very, very well, Egbert, in expressing that whole example for us. Were there any other comments about that initial point? That it's important to have learners say aloud some of the things in the content that the actual content teacher might not necessarily ask the students to say aloud.
Yeah.
Well, they do.
Yeah.
They should do, because if my student would write down a formula or equilibrium, my English is lacking. I'm not a language teacher,
Your English is perfect, Lida. Go ahead.
Then when you write these formulas and then an arrow and then on the other side, more structure, then if a student has a problem, I always ask him, well, tell me in normal language, what's the problem and what do you think that happens? And then I force them to tell me, in normal language what's happening there, and they usually understand much better than you start from the other side.
And there is an area of literature. I've got a book here in front of me off my shelf as you were speaking, Lida. Active Literacy Across the Curriculum by Heidi Hayes Jacobs. I think it's an American publication. It's an area of literature which actually makes the point that not about CLIL, actually. It's about learning in general. That learners need to be able to say in their own language, in their own vernacular, in their own words, what the content is about, and then go on and I'm making speech mark symbols here with my fingers, translate it into the language of the content. It's a stage of development of learning the contents, and I think personally, it's part and parcel of CLIL. It's asking them to understand the ideas that are on the page and make a journey to being able to express them, which is part of the learning of the content, I think, in CLIL terms.
But Keith, now we are back to former discussions, because, you know, we already stressed many times before that when you know your subject as a teacher and you're able to make all these translations, you know, from formulas into text and the other way around. I mean, that's the basis also for teaching in a second language. I mean, you should be aware of using the language so very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm sure Louis will have a comment to say here, because I've worked a long time with Egbert and Leader, Louis, and but I am very much aware that I'm a language teacher and they're both science teachers. And my suggestion for this page, and here I turn my attention to you, Egbert, as a chemistry teacher, looking at this particular example of the chemical formulae. What I would do is have all of these formulae on the board, and then I would annotate them with the useful phrases, such as, you know, as a gas. You mentioned as a gas, and then you mentioned reacts with, and reacts with represents the plus sign. So I would annotate the formulae in a different colour on a whiteboard, and have a colour that then represents useful phrases for expressing formulae, and it might be green. And then I'd have the learners try to remember the useful phrases for expressing chemical formulae that they can recycle in another context.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't matter at all that, if you do this in your second language or in your own mother tongue, because the students always need this help.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's another principle, perhaps I should say to Andreas and Stephen, that Leader's very, very outspoken and very strong in this belief that CLIL is not just useful for second language learners, but for mother tongue learners as well, of content subjects.
Yeah.
Should we move on a little bit? I think it's really useful. You know, we're actually doing exactly what I hoped we would, unless there are some other comments about this content.
Sorry, may I just say that I have to leave for another date. I'm so sorry to leave this interesting talk, and I will listen to the record as soon as possible.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Egbert.
Have a nice meeting for the next quarter of an hour.
Bye-bye for now, Egbert.
Bye.
Okay, Egbert's hung up. I was going to say, shall we move on a little bit, or is there anything anybody would like to say more about the content of these first two pages?
Well, let me just say one thing. I wanted to...
Andreas?
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to strongly agree with what Lida said. I do not really work that much with chemistry teachers, so I can only sort of compare it with math teachers. I do lots of work together with them, and well, all of them seem to be very, very ambitious, and they want their students to be able to read out these formulas. So for them, it's not just about writing, but it's about speaking as well. And they're really doing lots of work on that.
Okay.
So to me, it seems as if it was very, very important.
Yeah, and I suppose it would be useful for us to get some maths teachers in here, wouldn't it, and look at some maths, because I know from my own experience that the language demands of the maths subject are very, very specific because of this formulaic nature of the subject. Well, there's an invitation to you all. If you have some maths colleagues you think might like to join us, we could take some maths content and do the same thing in the future.
That would be great.
Okay.
I can definitely think of somebody.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that then, and perhaps we could try and work it in. And I know when I write my minutes up, obviously I'll send you some suggestions, and one of them is for us to focus on the younger learning age group, because of Stephen's request, and there's another colleague in Spain who'd like to join us as well. But we can, now my computer is working, or at least I have some technology to talk to you and record it, we can plan in the calendar for other discussions. Should we move on? I mean, the next page, student page 3, is a list of questions. And my feeling is you could actually provide language support for each and every single question on the page. And by language support, I mean you could analyze what language is needed to answer the questions, and then think about how you can provide phrases or sentences or vocabulary that will enable learners to produce effective and accurate answers to these questions. For example, number 2, effect of acid rain on metals. And I suppose the answer to that would depend on what the metal is. And there might be several parts to this answer that actually refer to different types of metals. So the effect language would be there, but it would depend on what actually the metal was, whether it's a metal that reacts very. Now I need an adjective in chemistry that works for this sentence now, don't I? Metals that react violently with acids, or metals that react softly with acids. Lida?
I think you see here straight away the weakness of this question, because you were wondering if they were talking about different metals. And yeah. I don't think students would. I mean, it's so difficult for them straight away in this age group to distinguish between different metals unless you ask specifically for that.
Yeah.
Well,
Louis?
It's written down right at the beginning of this paper that this set of lessons is addressed to students who have already some sort of pre-knowledge. So it would be required to have a pre-knowledge in terms of metals, I guess.
Yeah, okay, but still, it would help them a lot if you could ask them and just add one word like different metals or 3 metals.
Or put some examples in brackets, yeah. But I mean, all right then, look at gases. It's the same kind of question, isn't it? It's the same kind of question. And actually, I suppose talking about gases is easier because there are specific gases which cause acid rain.
Yeah, sure.
And so then describe the sources of these gases. Name the sources of these gases. You know, even there, the children could come out with one-word answers.
Yeah.
They could come out with one-word answers. But in terms of language development, you might encourage or expect more than one-word answers here. So you'd have gases believed to be the main causes of acid rain are maybe to a certain extent, you know, to a matter of degree, more important in causing acid rain than others. Certain gases may be. But I think you can get my point, can't you? That and it sounds like we're criticising science across the world here, doesn't it? But we're not. I think what we're actually doing is just making a point that when learners working in a second language come to material like this, there's a lot the teacher has to do to enable them to get through the work effectively.
There may also be quite a difference between how a child that is a native speaker of, you know, the target language which you've got here, English, as a native English speaker, how they might approach the question as opposed to somebody who's coming to it from a second language. You may get 2 different answers from the same question here.
Yeah. I'll ask Lida and Louis to come in for that point, but I like to look at the exams basically, Stephen, and the curriculum documents and try and have a look at what they demand, because in actual fact, really all my colleagues continue to say this to me in all the countries I visit and work in CLIL. It's what's in the exam that matters, and the final grade the students get that matters. So really, I believe CLIL should be providing for learners to succeed as much as possible in the exam according to what they're asked to do in the exam. And I suppose an examiner marking this may be happy with one-word answers for the students to get full marks.
That's a terrible situation, this, but that's how it is.
Yeah.
And I suppose you're leading them to, to the fuller answer that the curriculum dictates. So if you do want them to know how different metals are reacting, then of course, I guess that's stated in the curriculum, so you know that you need to spend some time on it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we might want to look at curriculum design itself as a topic, because most curriculum documents in most countries, in my experience, don't pay any attention at all to language within content material. In some countries now, they are actually looking at thinking skills and thinking functions, like hypothesizing. So that gives you an indication of what language may be needed, but nothing explicit about certain phrases or certain structures.
Yeah.
But Steve, coming back to these questions, I am criticizing these questions. We can't do it, and of course we can't do it. But I mean, if I had written this, it would have given the students much more structure than these questions give them.
Yeah. And I think you're onto something there in terms of assessment design, leader. I mean, you're obviously still talking about improving this material for native speakers, but I think you're onto something in terms of asking the right questions for learners working in another language, because you have to make sure your question is as clear as possible, don't you?
Sure.
You can't take any risks.
But not in your own language either.
Yeah.
You have to be absolutely clear.
Let's have a look at the table on the next page, if that's okay with you. Student page 5, looking at the facts. I actually use this table quite a lot in training context because it's such a horrible table. And obviously it's out of date, but that doesn't matter because we're talking about language demands here. So let's read through it. The origin of sulfur deposition in Europe, 1,000 tons of sulfur per year, the average for 91 to 92. And my simple question I give colleagues looking at this table is, write down a sentence about Belgium. Then compare Belgium with Russia. Then make a conclusion about the information generally in the table. So those three things. A simple statement about one country, a comparison between two countries which I know are very different, and then language sentence for drawing a conclusion from the information in the table. It's very difficult.
It's too difficult. There are so many variables. How can students ever answer this question? And how can they do it?
Well, actually, I suggested that as a teacher task, to raise their awareness about the demands of the thinking and the language within the table. But in terms of science across the world, I think the tables are there very generally for background information about acid rain in Europe and in a European context. I don't think they ask those specific questions, leader.
No, and I understand why you asked it to teachers, because this is a very good example of the wrong table and the wrong context.
I don't want to labour these materials if the rest of you haven't had chance really to have a look at them. I mean, I find them fascinating for obvious reasons.
I think it's quite useful in the fact that they're quite varied. We've looked at a diagram, we've looked at a table, we've looked at a sort of, a chart, and for me it's quite interesting just to see, different ways of looking at in terms of how to extract the language content from it. So I'm certainly very happy to stick with the materials we're looking at.
Okay, but in that case, if you've got a table like this, which is full of numbers and short forms of country names, which are easier to deal with. Actually, the country names are usually quite fascinating for my students, because they're not always aware of the short forms we give to countries. But how would you support them in expressing the information in the table. If you look at Germany, for example, is given with 912,000 tons of sulfur per year on average for 91 to 92. I mean, what I'm doing is making you really think in the way I ask teachers to think in workshops. And, you could say the same about Belgium, couldn't you? Make a statement about Belgium. Well, the sulfur deposition for Belgium is 44,000 tons of sulfur on average for 91 to 92. Making a comparison between that and Russia, well, Belgium suffers from far less sulfur deposition than Russia does. Yeah. Then drawing conclusions, you could analyze which countries are responsible for most of the sulfur deposition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where's Poland?
PL.
PL. I mean, that's usually a country to focus on because of the kind of coal that Poland produces, I think, which produces a high content of sulfur, or did at this time. And I'm on risky ground here because I'm not entirely sure if I've got this right, but I think it's to do with a brown kind of coal which was burned in the power stations to produce.
And it's a lot of sulfur, so it produced a lot of sulfur dioxide by burning.
And so you can, just our quick discussion over this table, Leader, you can see how much hidden assumed information and language there is behind these numbers.
Yeah, sure.
And then conclusions. Any suggestions about conclusions there? I mean, we've already made one about different types of coal, haven't we? And different sulfur content in coal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would make for an interesting discussion to extend on into sort of, the old industrial powers and the new industrial powers. The sort of, and I think that could extend from the table. I know that's not answering your question, but but it can certainly lead into some interesting discussion-based things. But I would say from this table, certainly the axes I think need to be. And I would need to highlight exactly what they represent, because I'm sort of darting my eyes up and down the table, trying to keep up with you as you say.
Okay.
What is it for Belgium? I'm jumping around all over the place. So I think.
Well, I think this is particularly severe form of content represented in a table. But you do find stuff like this in textbooks,
Striking conclusion from this table is how much sulfur dioxide, or whatever it is, Germany gets from Poland. Poland exports quite a lot of its bad things to Germany.
Yeah, so if you look at the line across Poland, leaders fixed on 270,000 tons of sulfur from Poland's production go to where is it? Switzerland? No, Denmark. Germany goes to Germany. So Leader's already on to another conclusion, isn't it, Leader? That you've identified who produces what and where it goes.
Yeah, sure. Because that's another consequence of this table.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot. I mean, my point there was it's a minefield of language. The table's a minefield of language. What about suggestions? And again, as the way we talked about chemical formulae, I think there are ways of embedding language within a task that deals with a table like this. It may be that you could produce the table with language around it. Language for making statements about individual countries, making comparisons between two countries in the table, and drawing conclusions. You could provide that language, maybe even the same way that the key is given underneath that explains which country is which. It might be a language key for those three focuses.
And Keith, I think before that you have to teach the students how to read this table and what sort of information they could get from it. For instance, what I just mentioned about, Poland exporting all these acid rain to Germany, maybe you could give that as an example. Here, you could draw that conclusions and then ask for another good example of a country exporting a lot or importing a lot from another country. So
I think Lida's onto something there. You might even combine the two, where you're talking about skills needed to read information in tables.
Yeah, sure.
In a CLIL context, you might include within that session in the learning sequence. These are some of the phrases you might need to use when interpreting information given in a table.
Yeah, sure.
That's a really good idea. I'll write that down.
It's free.
That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. A free teaching session which focuses on skills and language. Okay. Now listen, I'm aware that it's 7 o'clock here, so it's 6 o'clock where you are, which is our actual scheduled time to close. So let's stop, because I don't think it's a good idea if we start to go on longer than our scheduled time. It might set a precedence for us spending too much time at the computer, But by all means, let's come back to the topic if there's interest in that, or do send me other suggestions. Even if you can sit down, scan a page from a book, and say, have a look at this attachment, Keith. I think this would be a really good focus for a discussion. But
and Keith, maybe I know now what the misunderstanding was when we started, because I printed the new version of Acid Rain, which is actually different, completely different.
So can we have the new version emailed?
Downloadable, and it is web-based. It is not as a PDF, but it's web-based.
I'll tell you what I'll do. In the minutes, I'll embed the link to the page that has the new materials on it, so that you'll all get it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ida, how new is it?
Oh, well, 5 years at least.
Okay.
Years ago, because we changed from science across Europe to science across the world, and then quite a few of the popular topics were upgraded and updated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to summarise, then we've just chipped away at the edge of this whole area, haven't we? Really, but I think we've made a good start with part of the huge challenge that teachers face in preparing for teaching their subject in another language, in terms of knowing what language is needed and then making decisions about how to provide for their learners in a given learning context for content in a second language. So I'm going to stop recording there. I've stopped recording, and that means that we can carry on, wind up with any questions you like. But do please send me some suggestions, because I personally think that if we can do this with a wide variety of input content, even if it's stuff, I mean, I chose science because I work mainly with science more than other subjects, but I'm quite prepared to sit down and have a look at something I don't have any knowledge of or experience with, because I think it's very immediately useful for teachers who work in CLIL with a content area in another language.
Okay. Certainly the maths would be interesting, and there was somebody that mentioned maybe they could bring a maths teacher in, and that would certainly be an interesting topic to look at.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I'll talk to colleagues of mine, and I'm pretty sure that one or two of them might want to join us, and probably even bring in examples of their own.
I mean,
so
Stephen,
material
that might
they
be,
produced.
If in your experience with kindergarten and with primary, you may have maths knowledge yourself at first-hand experience that you can bring in.
Yeah, we've got some audio-visual stuff as well of some of the things that we're trying to do.